Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The hospital had a scent, a signature, really. A sterile cocktail of antiseptic, lingering sweat, and the faint metallic tang of blood, all underscored by the sickly sweet perfume of cheap air fresheners trying valiantly to mask something deeper, something less pleasant. As a night shift ICU nurse at St. Jude's Memorial, Evelyn Reed knew that smell intimately. It was the smell of life, and more often, the smell of its slow, inevitable surrender. Tonight, however, there was something else in the air. A coldness that seeped into the bones even through her thick scrubs, an almost imperceptible hum that resonated not in her ears, but in the base of her skull. It had been growing for weeks, an insidious presence that clung to the fringes of her awareness, like a shadow just out of sight. It started subtly with the patients under Dr. Julian Thorne's care. Thorne was St. Jude's golden boy. Brilliant, charismatic, impossibly young for a senior intensivist, he had a reputation for snatching patients back from the brink. His miracles were legendary, whispered about in the break room over lukewarm coffee. But Evelyn, with 15 years on the ward, had a nose for patterns, and Thorne's patterns were beginning to curdle. Take Mrs. Albright, for instance. 82 metastatic lung cancer, ventilator dependent. Her prognosis was grim, a matter of days. Thorne had taken over her case, and for 3 weeks Mrs. Albright simply lingered. Her vitals would dip, the monitor shrieking its death knell, only for Thorne to arrive, spend an hour alone in her room, and then, miraculously, her stats would stabilize. Not improve, mind you, just stabilize, held in a kind of suspended animation. Her eyes, when Evelyn checked them, held a vacant terror that was beyond the usual fear of the dying, a profound, hollow despair. Evelyn had tried to explain it away as a fluke, a testament to Thorne's skill, but the feeling persisted. Then there was Mr. Henderson, a trauma patient with massive internal injuries. He'd been declared brain dead, organs harvested. Yet on the night before his final procedures, Evelyn swore she heard a faint, shallow breath from his room, long after his ventilator had been silenced. She'd rushed in, only to find the room empty, the bed stripped. Thorne had been there, she knew. He'd signed off on the declaration, been the one to pronounce the time of death. It was these small, unsettling details that snagged on the fabric of Evelyn's professional calm. She started observing Thorne more closely. He was always immaculately dressed, even in the dead of night, his dark hair slicked back, his pale eyes unnervingly intense. He rarely joked with the staff, his interactions always professional, almost clinical. He had a peculiar habit of standing motionless for long moments outside certain patient rooms, his head cocked as if listening to something only he could hear. And then there were the smells. A faint, earthy scent, like damp soil and something metallic, that seemed to cling to his person, sometimes momentarily overwhelming the usual hospital aroma. One Tuesday morning, after a particularly grueling night, Evelyn found herself scrubbing out, Thorne beside her. The faucet hissed and the scent of antibacterial soap filled the small scrub room. He met her gaze in the mirror, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Another quiet night, Nurse Reed," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "As quiet as it gets in the ICU, doctor," she replied, a prickle of unease running down her spine. His eyes held hers for a fraction too long, a depthless quality to them that felt predatory. "Indeed," he murmured, before turning and disappearing down the corridor, leaving behind that faint, disturbing smell. The incident with Mrs. Chavez was the turning point. Mrs. Chavez was a young woman, only 35, a vibrant mother of two, brought in after a severe stroke. She was in a persistent vegetative state, her brain activity barely registering. Her family had made the agonizing decision to withdraw life support. On her last night, Evelyn was assigned to her. She checked on Mrs. Chavez around 3 a.m., dimming the lights, adjusting the blanket. That's when she saw it. Tucked discreetly behind the monitor, half hidden by a tangle of IV lines, was a small, ornate wooden box. It was intricately carved with symbols Evelyn didn't recognize, swirling patterns that seemed to writhe, and geometric shapes that felt ancient and alien. A thin, almost invisible wire snaked from the box, disappearing beneath Mrs. Chavez's pillow. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't standard hospital equipment. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, a sudden chill enveloping her. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, as if breathing it required an effort. Just as her fingers brushed the smooth, cool wood, a voice, soft and dangerously calm, cut through the silence. "Nurse Reed, is something amiss?" Evelyn spun around. Dr. Thorne stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the faint light of the corridor. He hadn't been on shift, he shouldn't have been there. A jolt of pure terror went through her. She forced a smile, her voice a little too high. "Dr. Thorne, no, nothing, just checking on Mrs. Chavez." She gestured vaguely at the patient, his gaze flickered to the box, then back to her. His smile widened, a slow, unnatural stretching of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes, a difficult case. I was just passing by, thought I'd check in myself." He took a step into the room, and Evelyn felt an immediate drop in temperature, like walking into a freezer. "The box," Evelyn began, trying to sound casual. "What is it?" Thorne moved with an unsettling grace, scooping up the box before Evelyn could react. He turned it over in his hand, his thumb tracing the strange symbols. "This Nurse Reed is merely a personal project, a new biofeedback device I'm developing. Experimental, of course. I'm gathering some baseline data. Nothing to concern yourself with." His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. "Strictly confidential." The implicit threat hung in the air, cold and undeniable. Evelyn nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Of course, doctor." He slipped the box into his coat pocket, the smooth fabric barely concealing its bulk. "Good night, Nurse Reed." And then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in the room with the lingering scent of damp earth and a profound sense of dread. Mrs. Chavez's chest rose and fell mechanically, but Evelyn felt a distinct absence in the room, as if something vital had been subtly, irrevocably diminished. That night sleep was impossible. The image of the box, the strange symbols, Thorne's cold eyes replayed in her mind. His explanation was flimsy at best, a biofeedback device connected to a dying patient in a coma. It made no sense, and the wire disappearing under the pillow, what was it connected to? The next day, Evelyn started digging. She stayed late, pretending to catch up on charting, but her real work was clandestine. She accessed Mrs. Chavez's files, looking for any mention of experimental treatments or devices. Nothing. She reviewed Thorne's past patient records. The same pattern emerged. Patients lingering, then a sudden, inexplicable decline, or, more rarely, a fleeting, almost too perfect recovery that was often followed by a rapid relapse. Always, Thorne was the attending physician. Always, he was present during those critical hours. She started cross-referencing patient deaths with Thorne's schedule, then with the unusual power fluctuations that had plagued the hospital's older wing recently. The maintenance staff had dismissed them as old wiring, but Evelyn noticed a correlation. Dips in power often coincided with the final hours of Thorne's lingering patience. Her investigation became an obsession. She ate lunch alone, her mind buzzing. She walked through the hospital halls, seeing shadows where there were none, hearing whispers that might have been the rustle of her scrubs. The air felt colder, the hum in her skull more persistent. She started to avoid eye contact with Thorne, but she could feel his gaze on her, a weight on her back, a chill on her neck. One afternoon, while searching for an obscure medication in the old pharmacy annex in the basement, a labyrinth of dusty shelves and forgotten supplies, Evelyn found herself drawn to a section marked Inactive Files Physicians. She knew she shouldn't, but the compulsion was overwhelming. She found Thorne's file. It was surprisingly thin. Minimal personal details, excellent academic record, a rapid ascent through the ranks. But tucked into a brittle envelope at the very back, separate from everything else, was a single, yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline was old, dated decades ago. "Prominent psychiatrist's son missing after wilderness expedition." A grainy photograph showed a young boy, no older than 10, with pale, intense eyes, a startling resemblance to Thorne. The story detailed the disappearance of Julian Thorne's elder brother, Thomas, during a hiking trip with their father. No body was ever found. The article mentioned the family's devastation, the father, Dr. Alastair Thorne, a renowned expert in neuroscience, withdrawing from public life. This didn't explain the box or the lingering patients, but it offered a glimpse into Thorne's past, a hint of deep-seated trauma. Evelyn felt a pang of sympathy, quickly extinguished by the cold dread that still clung to her. Her real breakthrough came a few days later, in the hospital library. Searching for articles on unusual biofeedback devices, Evelyn stumbled upon a forgotten tome titled Esoteric Energies and the Human Vessel. It was a relic, bound in dark leather, its pages fragile. Flipping through it, she found diagrams strikingly similar to the carvings on Thorne's box. The text, archaic and dense, spoke of vital essences, life force, and the ancient practice of drawing this energy from the dying to sustain or revitalize others. It mentioned specific symbols, specific materials like carved wood, and even peculiar energy signatures, cold spots, ozone smells, power fluctuations. Evelyn felt a tremor of pure horror run through her. This wasn't biofeedback. This was something ancient, something unspeakable. Thorne wasn't healing his patients, he was feeding on them, or rather on their departing life force. But for what purpose? To sustain himself, or to sustain another? The newspaper clipping flashed in her mind, his missing brother. She began to piece it together, a monstrous tapestry of scientific brilliance twisted by a dark, desperate grief. Thorne, a genius in modern medicine, combined with an understanding of ancient, forbidden practices. He wasn't prolonging life, he was siphoning its very essence. The discovery galvanized her. She had to expose him, but who would believe her? A respected doctor, a miracle worker, accused of performing black magic in the ICU. She'd be laughed out of the hospital, deemed unstable. She needed proof, irrefutable, undeniable proof. She started staking out Thorne's movements. She noticed he would often disappear into a rarely used section of the sub-basement, an old service tunnel that had been sealed off for years. It was supposedly just storage for condemned equipment, a place no one ever went. But Evelyn had seen him, several times, late at night, slipping through a small, unmarked door, carrying a nondescript bag. The night she decided to follow him was moonless, the hospital hushed save for the rhythmic beeps of machines and the distant rumble of laundry carts. The air was thick with that oppressive cold. She waited until his shift was almost over, then shadowed him through the deserted corridors. He took the old service elevator down, its ancient mechanism groaning. Evelyn waited a few minutes, then took the stairs, her heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sub-basement was a sensory assault. The smell of decay was overpowering, mingling with the metallic tang she now associated with Thorne. The air was heavy, still, and colder than any freezer. Pipes dripped, shadows danced in the weak, flickering emergency lights. She followed the faint, earthy scent, her hand gripping the railing, each step a conscious effort. She found the unmarked door, a heavy steel slab, almost invisible against the grimy concrete wall. It wasn't locked. Thorne was either supremely confident or incredibly reckless. Or perhaps, she thought with a shiver, he knew she was coming. She pushed the door open a crack. A faint, low hum emanated from within, accompanied by a rhythmic, almost organic thrumming. She peered inside. The room was vast, an old boiler room by the looks of it, but transformed into something else entirely. In the center stood a monstrous apparatus, glowing with an internal, sickly green light. It was a complex array of tubes, wires, strange crystalline structures, and more of that intricately carved wood, forming a large, egg-shaped chamber. Strange, geometric symbols glowed faintly on its surface, pulsating in sync with the hum. And within the chamber, floating suspended in a shimmering, dark liquid, was a figure. A man, pale and emaciated, his skin almost translucent, his eyes closed. His hair was long, dark, and floated around his head like seaweed. He was hooked up to countless tubes and wires that snaked into the apparatus, feeding into the glowing heart of the machine. He looked impossibly old, yet somehow preserved, as if time had both ravaged and frozen him simultaneously. Evelyn gasped a soft, choked sound. The figure in the chamber was undeniably Thorne's brother, Thomas, the missing boy from the newspaper clipping, kept alive for decades by some unholy means. Her eyes darted around the room. On a table nearby, she saw several of Thorne's biofeedback boxes, one of them open, revealing a complex interior of microcircuitry intertwined with more carved wood and tiny, pulsating crystals. There were vials filled with a dark, viscous liquid, test tubes containing strange organic matter, and an array of surgical tools, glinting ominously under the green light. On a monitor, Evelyn saw fluctuating vital signs, alarmingly similar to those of Mrs. Albright, Mrs. Chavez, and the other lingering patients. It wasn't just a biofeedback device, it was a conduit, a siphon. As she took in the horror of it, a voice cut through the hum, chilling her to the bone. "Fascinating, isn't it, Nurse Reed?" Thorne stood in the doorway behind her, his earlier calm replaced by an almost ecstatic fervor. His eyes gleamed with an unholy light, reflecting the green glow of the apparatus. He wore a surgical gown, his hands clean, but the faint scent of decay was stronger than ever. Evelyn stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "Thorne, what have you done?" He stepped closer, his movements deliberate, predatory. "What I have done, Evelyn, is cheat death. What I have done is save my brother. What I have done is master the very essence of life itself." He gestured proudly at the chamber. "Thomas, he almost died, a rare neurological disorder, a slow, agonizing decay. Modern medicine offered no hope, but I found another path, an older path. The life force of others, carefully extracted, slowly fed to him, keeps him in this perfect stasis. A living miracle sustained by a symphony of stolen breaths. You're a monster," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A monster or a god, I took what was freely given or what was already slipping away. A few days, weeks, months of borrowed time for those on the verge of eternity, in exchange for a lifetime for Thomas. A fair trade, wouldn't you say?" He walked over to a panel and adjusted a dial. The hum intensified and the liquid around Thomas in the chamber began to ripple more vigorously. "And now you know," he said, turning back to her, his smile unsettlingly serene. "A shame, such a diligent nurse, such a sharp mind. But a secret like this, it cannot be shared." Evelyn backed away, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. The heavy steel door was her only way out, but Thorne stood between her and freedom. "Don't worry," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "I won't harm you, not in the traditional sense. You're too valuable for that. Your insight, your intellect, they will be put to better use." He raised a hand, and Evelyn felt an inexplicable pressure in her chest, a sudden, dizzying lightness. The air in the room thickened, crackling with an unseen energy. A searing cold radiated from his palm, spreading through her body. It wasn't physical contact, but a force, a terrible, draining pull. Evelyn cried out, a sound that was swallowed by the hum of the machine. Her vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening. She felt as if something was being wrenched from her, something vital and irreplaceable. Her strength ebbed, her knees buckled. She fell, collapsing to the grimy floor. The cold intensified, piercing her to her very core. She could feel her own life force, shimmering, invisible, being drawn out, a silver thread pulled taut from her being, stretching towards Thorn, then disappearing into the glowing maw of his apparatus. Thorn knelt beside her, his face inches from hers, his pale eyes shining with a chilling triumph. Don't fight it, Evelyn, it's a natural transition. You will become part of the great work, a silent witness, a continuous source. Your consciousness will remain, observing, understanding. Imagine Nurse Reed, the ultimate oversight. You will see everything. Every breath drawn from every patient, every pulse of life that sustains Thomas. And you will be powerless to stop it. The last vestiges of her strength drained away. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision narrowed to a pinprick of green light. She could feel her mind, her essence, being stretched, thinned, until it felt like a ghost, a whisper tethered to a rapidly failing body. The hum of the machine became the dominant sound, resonating within her very being. Then there was only cold, a profound, bone-deep cold that penetrated everything. She was aware, agonizingly aware, of her body lying prone on the floor, growing colder, still connected by that ethereal tether to Thorn's monstrous creation. Her vision flickered, no longer through her eyes, but through some ethereal plane, seeing the room, the glowing apparatus, Thorn moving about, adjusting dials, tending to his brother. She was there, but she wasn't. Her mind, a trapped echo, screamed. It screamed at the injustice, at the horror, at the endless, silent servitude that stretched before her. She was a sentry in her own nightmare, a consciousness bound to the very thing she had sought to destroy. She was one of Thorn's patients now, her essence feeding the monster, her spirit condemned to eternal vigilance. The hospital's signature scent, the antiseptic and sweat and blood, now mingled irrevocably with the cold, metallic tang of ozone and decay, the aroma of a life stolen and a consciousness eternally damned. Evelyn Reed, the diligent night nurse, was no more. Only a whisper remained, a silent, screaming shadow, perpetually trapped in the heart of St. Jude's darkest secret. And the hum, the incessant, life-draining hum, was her lullaby into everlasting horror.